Hello, my name is Ellen Cook. I am in St. Francois Xavier in Manitoba, and I hear that you wanted to know something about how we gathered food, I believe, how we lived off the land when we were growing up in Grand Rapids. So that is where I grew up, was in a place called Misipawistik, which means Grand Rapids in the Cree language. And I grew up surrounded by pristine wilderness in the heart of the boreal forest. And the rivers flowed freely and majestically since the end of the Ice Age. And the forest was vibrant with millions of species of plants and animals. Our staple fish was the sturgeon, and the main meat was from the moose. Our home was situated a kilometer downriver from the big rapids, where it thundered between high limestone banks of the Saskatchewan River and emptied into Lake Winnipeg, just 1 kilometer downstream from where we lived. And in the past, my ancestors used to stand on the rock cliffs beside the deep pools at a spot called the Nigapig to scoop sturgeon out of the rapids. That's how our community became established, because people were there because of the sturgeon. They had been in various places where the sturgeon had been fished out, like on the Red River near Winnipeg, and there was a lot of sturgeon on the Saskatchewan River, so a lot of people gathered there for many centuries. There was an archaeological dig that was done there, and there was one 3,000-year-old place where people had gathered, and there was a fire pit that they found, and literally thousands of sturgeon bones were found there. And sturgeon doesn't have much in the way of bones, just the head and the spine, and some of the scutes, those scales along the side of the sturgeon. So there was people fishing for sturgeon along the Saskatchewan in that area for many centuries. And so that's how our grandfather ended up there. Our great-grandfather came from St. Peter's Reserve because the Red River had been fished out from the sturgeon, so he decided he would go up Lake Winnipeg to Grand Rapids because he heard that there was still a lot of sturgeon there, and that's how he ended up there. The sturgeon is popular among our people because it's the best for the kids to eat, because it doesn't have bones that a child may choke on. And it's also called optimal foraging, because a family needs only one good-sized sturgeon to feed the whole family, rather than getting 2 or 3 pickerel or other fish that has lots of little bones in them. When we were growing up, we would go up the river along the series of rapids along the Saskatchewan for our time of harvesting and gathering, in order to prepare for the winter. We stopped at various places along the way, depending on what foods and what routes it was that we were after. There was a place called Kawanimitoskak where we stopped to pick strawberries, and we'd stop and camp there for maybe a week or 2. And then there was another place where we picked Saskatoons, and another called Segupiak where raspberries were plentiful. And we would camp for extended periods in the places where our father would kill a moose, because we needed to stop and dry as much of the moose meat as we could in order to preserve it for winter, for eating in the winter. And we dug roots, especially Seneca root, which is a root used for cold medicines, and also rat root, which is good medicine for various illnesses, for headaches and colds and whatever. There are many uses for that root. Is a very popular medicine among our people. And there are also leaves and various kinds of medicinal leaves that we gathered. There's one called kagigepagus, which is really good for infected skin conditions. If you have an ingrown toenail, for example, or various other infections on your skin, and you just put the leaf on it and tie it on there and keep it on there for a couple of days, and it takes away the infection. And sometimes we would stop for extended periods to smoke fish. If our father caught lots of fish in the net, then we would have to stop and smoke dry the fish. The entire summer was busy with preparation for the winter, which is what we did, and the whole family had to work. Like, we weren't allowed to play at all, even though we camped in the most beautiful places along the river and in the lakes. But we weren't allowed to play till the work was done at the end of the day. And our mother also always had a garden beside our home, and it was tended to by one of the older siblings over the summer, who got to stay home for the summer, and that was mostly our oldest brother. There was one summer where my older sister and I got to stay home, and that was part of our job, was to take care of the garden, make sure it was watered and weeded. My mother loved turnips, and she grew lots of turnips, enough to last over the winter, and she also grew other root vegetables such as carrots, potatoes, radishes, etc. To this day, at every family feast, it is imperative to have turnips as part of the menu in memory of our mum. Sometimes we would have a nice harvest of cabbage and tomatoes, beans, peas, and these were canned and preserved, as was the fruit that was purchased off the freight boats that came in from Winnipeg up the Great Lake. The Seneca root that we dug over the summer, there was a lot of Seneca root that was dug because we wanted to trade some of it at the trading post, so that we would be credited for groceries that we would need for the winter. And the Seneca root would be sent away to the pharmaceutical company to be made into cold medicines. And for us, that would mean that we could have flour, sugar, and other staples over the winter using that credit from the Seneca root. Some of the dried moose meat was also canned in order to preserve it for a longer period. The fish was smoke dried, so that lasted for quite a long time. We were surrounded by Mother Earth's resources, which we learned to use in a respectful way. As children, when we were hungry, we would eat what we could find outside in nature rather than running to the store to get chips and drinks and chocolate bars like kids do nowadays. Instead, we went outside and we ate rose petals, rose hips, only the red cover, not the seeds. And we ate the pineapple weed and any berries we could find around our home. The nuts, the hazelnuts. There was always something to be found to be eaten. And we had to be resourceful as children, as there were no store-bought snacks in our lives. So it was a life that was rich with Mother Earth's resources, and we were taught as children to be very careful because nothing lasts forever. And we have a saying that was attributed to one of our famous chiefs. We did not inherit Mother Earth's resources from our ancestors. We are borrowing it from our children. We did not inherit it from our ancestors. We are borrowing it from our children. So we need to keep that in mind when we are using Earth's resources, is that we need to realize and know that we have to leave things behind for our future generations and not be wasteful and not be killing 2 or 3 moose every year and selling it, which is what a lot of people do, and that is such a terrible thing to do. Yes, it's good to kill 2 or 3 moose in the year, as long as you're sharing it amongst your community members, not to be selling it outside your community. That is recklessness and greed, because you sell it for money. And we need to remember that our resources will not last forever. So I hope that this is what you had in mind in terms of telling you what we did as when we were growing up in terms of gathering food and having food over the winter when we had no electricity. So hopefully this is good. Thank you for listening.